Hello, I'm Danielle Smith, guest hosting for Common Sense Calgary, and we're doing a series of interviews with candidates for Calgary City Council. I am now joined by Ward 3 candidate Brent Trenholm. Brent, thanks so much for being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
You got it. So first, let's begin. It's a big step to decide to run for public office. What is it? What's the bee in your bonnet? What's the reason you decided to run?
I'm sort of tired of tax and spending that's going on over the last few years. And some of the policies that are going through just resonate with me and the people that I talk to. So about a year ago, I decided to go at it. So I've been going campaigning in some sort or another for about a year now.
Okay, well, let's talk then about Ward 3 in particular. The candidate who had been there before, Jody Gondek, is now deciding to run for mayor. Just the priorities that she chose in the last 4 years, do you agree with some of the decisions she made, or would you have done something differently if you'd been there?
I would have spent more time on economics, community needs, more listening to what's going on, and a little bit less on social justification.
Okay, well then let's talk about some of the particular issues happening in your ward. You've got a lot of development north of Calgary in the industrial area, and I know that Ms. Gondek had an issue with all of those tax dollars going to the adjacent municipality. I'm very concerned that some of that was not taking place within the Calgary city limits. But you also have a growing suburban communities in North Calgary. So where do you see the biggest issues?
I've knocked on a lot of doors, and what I'm getting from residents is that they feel left out. You can look at the high school where it took several years to even get it approved and shovels in the ground, which just happened a few months ago. And services, the Green Line is one that a lot of people want, but there's a lot that don't. So, but those would be it.
Talk to me a bit about the Green Line, because I think that was. Talk to me a bit about the Green Line, because I know that in South Calgary, they're quite passionate about wanting to see that leg go ahead, whereas in North Calgary, it's a little less clear because there isn't a defined right of way yet. They haven't made as much progress on it, expensive to get it across the river. Do you think that it should go ahead, or do you think there's another way to bring the transit services to the north?
I don't think it's a matter of thinking whether it should go ahead or not, because it's already sort of there. And so I don't think a person can do a whole lot about it now. Would I have done something different? Yes. And I think originally this thing was supposed to go to the west, or up to us, northwest. And it ended up going south, and they bought all the land. And so it made more sense right now to go south and then go across the river. The north has been ignored for so long, and people are frustrated, and transportation is needed, and rapid transit is really needed. In most cities that you go to, they do have a good transit system, and I've been all over God's creation, and I've been on many of them. And cities that do have those transportation systems, they function better, and people can move about a lot better and stuff. So my opinion on it is I have it's basically, I think it's $5 billion that goes nowhere. And that's unfortunate because it goes to 16th Avenue, which is basically just across the river. So I don't understand the logic. It should come all the way up and not south.
So let me tell you, one of the candidates I spoke with said that part of the way that they could get the south end working is to not build that downtown section and to just have the leg match up with the existing infrastructure that's there. Do you have any creative solutions for how you might be able to get the North Line built?
Moving the blue line over to the airport and then into Ward 3?
Is that what you'd like? No, I'm asking you. Do you have another way of serving the north?
Yeah, well, I was looking at that one, and you would kill two birds with one stone. The airport needs to be serviced. You could bring it around, and it comes into west. It's a long way to go around, and then you work it back into the city instead of coming out to Ward 3. but there's been a huge amount of discussions, and I'm looking at it now just so I have more what's going on. But right now that Green Line's going to 16th Avenue, they have a different train system where it's a level entry as opposed to a platform. And to me, I'm an operations guy, a mechanic as well. So I built a lot of this kind of stuff. And when I look at the maintenance costs of it, and will be huge. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're having troubles going into downtown, because they can't use the existing track system. I may be wrong, and that's fine. But if they can't use the existing track system, how are they going to get in there? So my thought is that they should use the existing train system. Then they have one set of parts, one building, or maybe two buildings with all the same stuff. Look at the WestJet philosophy when they first started their business. They 737s. That's all they had. So it's from a mechanical maintenance perspective, it's a lot cheaper to go that route than to have two different parts. So look at Air Canada. Everything, you got to have all those different types of parts. You got to store them. So it increases your inventory costs. And so from an operational perspective, it's a lot more money down the road.
Let's talk more about, use the Green Line as a bit of a jumping off point to get into some of the other issues that council deals with. There is a sort of a sense, and I'd be interested in your view, there's different ways of looking at how decisions should be made on council. One is that you delegate a lot to the administration and you trust their judgment, and then you approve the ideas that they bring forward. There's another view that council members should be more involved in helping to direct, especially some of these big projects and other controversial issues. How do you see it? How should the council member interact with administration?
My approach is the latter. I think that councillors should be involved directly. It would help from a cultural perspective, where the councillor could understand the administrator's position or perspective on the other side of the equation. And the end result would be a whole lot better. So, and I would look at a person like myself, I was elected in the 90s in BC, and we were building a rink. That's a good example. So I sat on the board and on the design and how it's all going to go up. I'm also a hockey player. So when it comes putting the rooms together for dressing rooms and what have you, rink and positioning and stuff, I had direct involvement in it. So I had a pretty good idea what was best. And so the end is we've figured some of that kind of stuff out, but I also think that it's very valuable if a councillor actually understands how things function.
It's a good. Well, then let's talk a little bit more about some of the other projects, because there is I think there is a perspective that the capital projects often don't include all of the costs and all of the benefits associated for them. And then I think there's always a big surprise at the end. Like I think Green Line turned into one of the big surprises where they only had the money to build half of it. And don't really have a plan to build the rest of it. But there's a number of other big ticket items that I'll talk to you about. But do you think there's a better way to be managing those capital projects?
A better way. I think that comes down to just councillors being more involved in what the process is. It's fine for administration to go about their route. But when they just feed council what they want to feed council, but I think council needs to take some more direction in that and ask for information, specific stuff, and get more into what's going on in the back end. From a management leadership position, I've always found that works a whole lot better because once again, it helps you understand the process better.
Okay, let me then ask it from the administration's perspective, because there were 4 big ticket items that came forward: the event center with the Calgary Flames, the BMO Center expansion, the Arts Commons transformation, and the Foothills Fieldhouse. And when the city voted to approve the projects, that was against the advice of the CFO, who said that they couldn't afford to do all 4 of them. What's your perspective on that? Are there a couple of those projects that you think are real priorities and others that can be shelved, or do you think there's a better way to approach them so that all of them can be built? How do you see it?
I don't think you can build everything at the same time, and I think this is one of the issues that's going on. So with all the capital expenditures, that's a lot of money, a lot of interest. And when you look at what the debt ratio of the city and how it gets up there and gets up there, you find that the higher that debt ceiling is, that the less of maintenance and other pieces of equipment or buildings that you can get. And I think that this council is overspent, and they should have held back a bit on some of these things and phased them in a bit better and start doing some maintenance. So my perspective is that I think now all this stuff is in the works, which is fine. Now we need to go and create a base and start fixing the potholes and the sidewalks and doing some basic maintenance and the basic services that people pay for in their taxes. So the taxes go up, the services go down. That's what I hear at the doors every day.
Let's talk then about the operating side, because you said that taxing and spending was one of the reasons why you were motivated to run. So let's talk about spending, because the approach that is often taken is that it seems like there's an annual increase in line with the city's inflation and population growth estimates. Others propose that it should be in line with actual inflation and population. Others are arguing that we should have a spending freeze, and others are arguing that we should find places to cut. What is your priority? What do you think the general approach should be?
I have a consulting business, and what I do for a living is go into companies that are dysfunctional, bureaucracies that are challenged a bit, and processes are not being followed or there are none. So I have direct involvement, and I've been doing it for a long time. So looking at how their administration functions is really important to me.
Okay, so generally speaking, though, do you think that there's a spending problem, or do you think they've got the spending about right, but I
guess they got a spending problem.
Do you have some thoughts on where you might find some savings?
I think that what we need to sort of look at is doing a forensic audit of the whole building and see where the costs are going, what the people are doing, how information goes through, how many silos you find, some very simple things like that. So an experienced person like myself, I can walk in there in 2 minutes, I'll know. Which is very interesting.
Do you think you'll find enough savings there? Or do you think, because when you look at any time you've got a public service, the bulk of what you're paying money on is salaries. And there's a lot of pay scales that are set with automatic steps. So even if you did have a pay freeze, if people were moving up the ladder, they would still end up increasing the labor costs. There's defined benefit pension plans that create a long-term liability. Do you have any thoughts on how to tackle any of that?
I think right now there needs to be a wage freeze, and if you move up the ladder, the other should be moving up the ladder. That would be the next one, right? I think there should also be a hiring freeze. We don't need to be creating any more positions. What's going on? And I see a few, and they need it. Maybe, I don't know. I'm not in there, so I don't know all of the particulars. But I think they just need to back off a bit on their spending, look at how they function as a unit, and I think that's where the savings will be. I think they can probably, I don't know, you're figuring somewhere between $10 and $30 million just by doing it. So
all right.
One-time cost, and then you put that over 10 years, is a significant amount of money, right?
Right. What about the councillors themselves? Do you think their salaries and pensions and benefits are reasonable?
In the private industry, I make a lot more than what a councillor makes. So, and I think the councillors, they have a thankless job. And it's not one that a lot of people really care for. And some days I ask myself, why am I doing this? Because it's going to be a headache. But I like it because I like being run off my feet. It keeps me younger. Anyways. So, and overall, I think it's okay. But I think there should be, I like to see them take a bit of a cut and then go into administration, and then they take a bit of a cut. And it shows a good faith that we're listening, we want to do this. And I think that if you don't lead by example, you get nothing from everybody else. So the further down the ladder it goes, and people, well, why should I take a hit? And they're taking a $10,000 a year raise or whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's just morally wrong to me.
I take your point. Okay, let's talk a bit about taxes. So there has been quite a move, and the councillor who did represent Ward 3 has spoken publicly about it many times, about a tax shift so that the balance of the tax revenue coming from the business community goes down and the amount paid and shouldered by the residential community goes up. Are you generally in favor of that approach?
That's a 100-year-old argument. It's been around forever. I think everyone's got to pay their fair share. I think if this council focused more attention on economic growth and how to get that downtown occupied, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
You're right. How do you get that downtown occupied? The shortfall in the number of jobs downtown, and the Calgary Economic Development has said as much as 100 to 140,000 positions could be filled with the vacancies down there. That's a lot of people.
And then that's where I think what we need to do is focus a little bit more attention on economic development. And through that, and in my experience in the past is, and we got to get out there and pull those businesses in. It's just like a sales guy going to sell a widget. They got to go sell some buildings and some space and what have you. And it's working, but it's working slowly. As the taxes go up and up and up, it becomes less attractive to businesses. Even though we're lower than a lot of other provinces, I think that makes no difference at all. We're still here in Alberta, and what we have and what our rates are and the bureaucracies that get in the way of better movement and judgment will just push people away.
Do you think that we'll talk more about your approach on taxes, but the approach that we have seen has been using $100 million to try to subsidize and attract businesses here. Do you support doing more of that?
I was looking at that, and yes and no, but with a modification. If a person's going to come here, there's got to be a commitment, and you don't just get the money and open the door, then the next year pack it in. So I'm not in favor of that approach. I know there's people on both sides of the spectrum would like to see it disappear. But I think we're in such a point now that we got to do something, and we need jobs. And that will help. If we had jobs and the economy was going again, it would take care of a lot of problems that we're seeing right now.
Okay, there have been proposals in the past with the city charter that has included diversifying the tax revenue base, is maybe how I should put it in the language of the report, so that there isn't an over-reliance on property taxes. So the simple way of putting that is getting new taxation powers. Do you think that there needs to be new taxation powers for the city? No.
I think that people are done. There's only one taxpayer. And when you look federally, provincially, everywhere you turn, everyone wants to pick your pocket. And I think taxpayers are fed up. From all the people I've talked to, I get that opinion lots. It's that, what do you mean you're going to tax me more of this and you're going to increase fees on that? How am I supposed to pay my mortgage? My wife and I, we were walking around one day dropping flyers, and she come across this lady who come out, and she was crying her eyes out, and she thought that my wife was the person that was coming over to console her because she's getting ready to lose her house. And both of us felt horrible, and we're going, what can we do? And so I hear this a few times. I know a few businesses that are shutting down, a lot of them actually, because they can't keep up, and COVID didn't help any of this at all either, right? And I mean, and no one can blame anyone for that and how it affected things. However, the economy was in toilet already, and government in general should have done a better job of realizing it earlier and just taking a more proactive approach. And then it comes down to the federal government, where their policies, in my opinion, have destroyed the country, or putting it on that pathway. You can't just shut down the oil and gas simply with a switch, and that's what has happened. Do I agree in green? Yes, I do. I'm a kind of a bit of a green guy. I'm from Vancouver Island. I fish, hike, swim, whatever. I'm a sports guy, right? And I love the outdoors. I camp every year all the time, and green space and bike paths and all that kind of stuff is really important to me. But you can't just switch from one to the other, especially when the other one's not even ready to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then you look at mining. I'll go back to when I was in Calgary. We in 1993 or 94, we had what they called the 12% solution, where the government of the day decided that they were going to make 12% of the provincial forestry into where you can't cut trees down. And they did all of it on Vancouver Island, and it killed the industry. Industry said that if we go in on a phased approach and you have high density, low density, mid density, or whatever, so either swampland, greenland, or a mixture of the two, and you log each one selectively. Good on the environment, good on the economy, and you get revenues coming in. So when you look at what's going on here, and when I moved here in '97, people had a different perspective, and I explained some of the stuff that happened in BC and how it's going to come east, and now here it is.
It makes me wonder how you're going to answer this next question then, because that is really what at the core of a lot of the battles that we see at City Hall is how do you build your city? Do you build it denser and build up, or do you allow for greenfield development so that you can build out, so that you can have more affordable housing, or do you have a mixture of those two things? How do you see it?
I think you have a mixture of the two, and that brings us right to the Guidebook Conversations today down at City Hall. And I listen to a lot of it, and people just don't want it. People don't understand it. I think the consultation process was poor. A lot of other people think it's poor. I've had some phone calls from irate people saying, "Where do you stand on that? Where do you stand on that?"
Well, where do you stand on it? Why do you think people are so mad? What is it that you're hearing?
They don't like the idea that their neighborhood. I'll use a lake. You have a lake. Everyone's living in a lake. Well, let's use Harvest Glen golf course as an example. So these people bought their house on a golf course, beautiful, whatever, and they figured it's good. It's an investment. It's peaceful. It's quiet. And then next thing you know, there's houses in there, which destroys the whole ambiance of why they bought there and why they built custom homes. And then when you go and deal with density, like they want to do downtown a bit, where you have 3, 4, 6-story houses in very tight vicinity to each other, you lose green space, and you lose privacy, and you lose be able to go in your backyard and build a garden. And that's the thing that a lot of people here really like, and are accustomed to.
So there does seem a reluctance, though, to approve new outline developments. There was a proposal, I think, for 10 communities to come forward, and the argument was that there wasn't enough money to pay for core infrastructure to support them, in particular fire halls and the staffing for those fire halls. So that's one of the challenges. So do you just say, yes, do you find a way to fund that additional infrastructure development, or do you just say no to that kind of growth?
Growth is inevitable. Forward path happens, and all you can do is manage it. Don't try and control it, like what this guidebook's trying to do, but manage it. So urban sprawl is a huge issue. It is in actually a lot of communities. It was back in Campbell River, where I lived there for years and where I was counselor. And urban sprawl is a huge thing. So that's where these skinny houses come from. And it's a European concept, get closer together. So, but it causes other problems. So now when the fire department's got to go put out one house, they got to put out 3 houses because they're right next door to each other. So there are downfalls to that. So if you go into a very high density place where you got a row of townhouses, 3 stories high, a block wide, one catches fire, well, you lose everybody. And no green space, no privacy. They end up with traffic problems because everyone's going to want to have a car, and you got to move people around. And unfortunately, we can't take massive transit everywhere we want to go at the second that we need to go. And so I think it's not well thought out.
So this is going to be dumped in your lap. It's probably going to be resolved prior to the election, but you're going to deal with the fallout of it. What would you like to see done instead?
I'd like to see them push it off to the election, so people have more consultation process. I think a guidebook is a great idea, not a statutory one. I think it needs to be a moving one that still comes to council, and the planners don't have the last say. And this is what this guidebook could do. So I think it needs to be pushed off. And if they don't push it off till the next election, then they obviously don't want to listen to what the population wants.
All right. We've talked quite a bit about the economy already. Thank you for that. Let's get into some of these final questions. I sort of have them as a bit of a rapid fire. If you have something more you want to say on them, though, you feel free to do that. Sure. Snow removal caused a lot of problems in a lot of communities in this last bout in winter. What did you hear from constituents about that? Was it a big issue where you were, and what can be done to improve it?
It was a huge issue. People were really ticked, and more so they were ticked because it fell just before Christmas, which is beautiful, right? And then it sat around for a month, and people couldn't get out of their house to go to work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think council needs to understand that we live in a place where there's snow. I don't know if they realize that, but it snows here, and it snows a lot. And sometimes it doesn't melt right away, so they need to get in there. So you don't go and reduce snow budget hoping that, by golly, that it's not going to snow, and then pull off from contingencies that you were already planning to use anyway. So why don't we just be real with budgets instead of going and trying to push things into different corners or buckets to make things look better?
So budgeting properly, one solution. What about bringing in more private sector contractors or contracting out, whether it's for snow removal or, as one of the council members has been advancing, the idea of having garbage collection potentially be private sector, golf courses being delivered by the private sector? How do you see the private sector being able to deliver on some of these government services?
On snow removal, on all of them, actually, the private sector can do things pretty good. And as well as the city does stuff not bad as well, right? So there needs to be a mixture. And usually, historically, contractors cost about 30% more overhead. Whereas city stuff here, they probably a lot of times have because they have all this equipment, all these people. So the cost is probably pretty neutral. So in the snow removal, I think that they need to have some more contractors, and I think they need to budget for it. And for garbage collection, why not try it? Maybe it will work if we can keep those services down, and then look at other places where, like the fire department, and the fire department is on 24-hour shifts, and you're saying they love it. They're saving $1 million a year. Some political people don't like it, and they want, because it wasn't their idea, I guess, I don't know. But anyways, why not listen to people? I know from Ward 3 perspective, there hasn't been a whole lot of consultation. And I know that from talking to people and my own experience. And what happens, a lot of people and politicians, they get elected and they just believe in what they have, the people that surround them, and they use that as a guide and not reach out to those conversations that are different than their own opinion.
Well, then let me ask you about this other one, because you must have gotten some feedback on it. There is a move to, they call it defund the police. What it is taking a portion of the police budget and putting it into other social service supports for mental health and addiction issues. Do you support that approach?
I don't support the approach that council took. Not at all. I think it was foolish, not well thought out, and they're bending for something that didn't serve anyone any good. Should the police department be reviewed and see if there's more ways we can work with different components of the community? And I think that's very important. There's a lot of smart people out there, and the police aren't the answer for all. I mean, social workers, mental health, whatever, all that kind of stuff. There's a skill out there to help where it's needed, but it needs to be figured out first. and then you look at how you're going to fund it. You don't go and take funding away willy-nilly just because you have this thought that we needed to fund the police because the United States said we need to defund the police, and it falls up here, and then some of these same councillors go and say, "Oh, we need more police on the transit system because of people doing whatever." So I mean, come on.
All right, let me just ask a couple more questions here. You've probably seen the scrap that the city is having with the province over the issue of central dispatch for EMS. Do you have an opinion on that issue?
I don't know. I'm not really one for centralized stuff. I agree with the mayor and council's position on that they need to not. Yeah, it should be regionalized, not centralized.
Okay, let's talk about a couple of the issues that are coming up for referenda. They made the decision to reduce the speed limits in residential areas down to 40 kilometers per hour without putting it to a referenda, but they did make a decision to put fluoride to a referendum. Do you have a position on either of those issues? Do you think they made the right decision? Should both of them be made by council? Should both of them been left to the public? How do you see it?
I think that someone was just trying to go and take advantage of the situation. And if council could push one to a referendum, not the other, then someone's being self-serving. With the fluoride issue, we dealt with that one 30 years ago. And it was determined scientifically, and I have the research, that it's not healthy in the water. And it causes more problems than it solves. And on the speed limit thing, I think it's a waste of $3 million or 2.3 or whatever it ends up being. Why would you want to go and reduce it to 40 when people go that speed anyways? And there are some people with lesser standards that think that they can do whatever they want and whenever they want. And are you going to be able to change their mind? No. And I look at my street. If someone tried to go in 40 or 50 on the street, they'd be crazy. And I've walked lots of streets to be the same thing, right? We at the end we still need to move traffic. We're not in the Jetson era. I'm not sure if you remember that one.
I do remember that one, but we're getting there. Let's
So when we get into close to that, then yeah, start looking at different ways. But right now we're not flying around in the air.
All right, public art policy. I think we all have images in our mind. I always think of the big blue ring whenever I think about Calgary's public art policy. Probably not what they wanted to be the iconic image of art in Calgary. But what do you think of the approach that they've taken now, having this independent board that would look at and make decisions on public art? Do you think that's the right approach, or do you think they should do something completely different?
I think they need to scrap it. I think the blue ring and the rusty pylons are a waste of money. And what irritates me most about them is not so much the money, but they had it contracted out of town to get it designed and built when there's so much skill in this city that they could have done it here for a lot cheaper. Whether a private board does it or not, I don't know. It makes no much difference, but I think they need to put that to bed for a while.
All right. Let me just ask one final question. If you had to deal with a situation where there was a decision that would be good for your ward, but may not be great for the city as a whole, how would you come down on that issue?
I'd vote for my ward. At the end, I'm elected by them. I need to represent them. But I also need to go and consult with them. And so that's one of those things that I'm a big accountability person. And if you can't be accountable for your actions and you want to talk in circles and not say anything, then you need a different job. So consultation with your ward on key issues, and you take what they say because they're the boss, right?
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
You got it. That was your Ward 3 Council candidate, Brent Trenholm.